Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christian from TaylorMade Technologies. I'm the head of cybersecurity, and I'm here this afternoon to talk to you about planning, preparing, and limiting the consequences of a cyber breach. So this afternoon, we're going to be talking about understanding the modern cyber threats, learning from a real-world attack, and what SMEs should do to protect themselves, and ultimately how TaylorMade can help. So I've been in cybersecurity for just over 10 years now, and I would say that this list here of the biggest threats in 2023, 2024 haven't really changed too much over the years. I would certainly say that they've not changed much in the last 2 or 3 years. Main purposes of this session are to raise awareness within the SME space. Ransomware is almost certainly the biggest threat right now, even more so with double and triple extortion issues. Most ransomware attacks are successful ultimately as a result of phishing or some sort of third-party vulnerability, and also supply chain attack, which we've seen a massive increase in the last year or so. And by supply chain attack, that's essentially where a company has a third-party supplier or a third-party system, such as a SaaS-based product. That could be, for example, Office 365, Salesforce. If one of those third-party suppliers gets breached and they've got access or a sort of an in into your network, then that can also be a massive issue as well. Another big one is third-party data breaches. These are breaches that impact mainly individual members of staff that have signed up to a third-party service that the company is using. That could be things like a project management portal or some sort of forum or something like that. Ultimately, an organization has no control over protecting that sort of data, and ultimately you are relying upon that third party to secure that data. The biggest risk here comes in when you've got users that are reusing passwords over multiple services. So for instance, if a user has a particular password for Office 365 or to log into their computer, and then they're reusing that password in a third-party service, then that third-party service gets breached, then the attacker ultimately is able to gain access to a third-party system, gain access internally to 365 or on-prem as a result of that third-party breach. Now, this is unlikely to change for some time. Ransomware is still the most common method of attack. And one of the biggest issues we see is that clients are not prepared for such an attack. And that's where incident response comes in. Now, in terms of motivation, it's mostly financial. Most of the attacks, it could be ransomware, as I've already mentioned, or it could also be a invoice redirection fraud. They're the two most common ones, and again, both are financial. SME is a massive target, and the main reasons for that is because typically they've got inadequate protection, especially if they're relying too much on their IT partner or potentially an internal IT team that don't necessarily have the correct skill sets to be able to secure an environment. SMEs are really rich in sensitive data. They have information on the partners they work with, individual clients they work with. Typically, they've got large databases and CRMs full of PII. And often you'll find intellectual property is also a target as well. So here we have a slide that I've put together showing recently hacked companies within the last sort of couple of years or so. Now there's some biggies on there. Almost certainly most of you probably know at least 50%, if not even more. The ones towards the bottom, Progress, Papercut, Royal Mail, Go Anywhere, and 3CX are more recent breaches in the last few months. Now, often when I talk to clients about these sorts of breaches, the first thing they normally say to me is, well, these companies are really big. But it's not only enterprise that's being targeted, not only enterprise that's being attacked. I think the NCSC, I mean, there's loads of stats out there, so it depends on which source you're using. But I think the NCSC estimate that around 40% of all UK businesses in the last year have been a victim of some sort of cyber attack. Now, that could be something as basic as a single mailbox breach, but it could also be something much, much bigger, such as a ransomware attack. So this is a platform called a honeypot, as whilst it's loading. Essentially, this is a system that we've got set up, that we've deployed. It's an open source piece of software that we've got on some of our systems to ultimately detect what type of cyber attacks are happening around the world. And this gives us an indication of all of the malicious systems that are targeting ultimately every system on the internet. So when I mentioned earlier on about it not only being enterprise as a target and SMEs are a target too, ultimately there are systems on the internet that are scanning the entire address space of the internet. So every single IP on the internet, every single externally facing service on the internet is being scanned all the time. And they will ultimately be looking for platforms that have vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So therefore, it isn't only enterprise. If you've got an externally facing system on the internet, then it will be being scanned. And if it has a vulnerability, then almost certainly it could be exploited. Now, I just want to show you this. What could possibly go wrong? It's live. So here you will see on the screen the pink blob in the middle. I think it's meant to be some sort of balloon. That is where our system sits. Now you'll see all those little shooting stars coming across the screen to that blob. That's where the attack is currently originating from as we speak. So you can see here that there's, the top ones are Philippines, Russia, Romania, Brazil. And some of the most recent events are like United States, Russia, Argentina. FTP's file transfer is one of the biggest targets. But if we just shoot back to this one for a second, and I'll refresh it to give us the last 15 minutes, that will show us. So in the last 15 minutes, our box that's ultimately sat there looking like it's deliberately vulnerable, it's just collating all the information and everything that's being collected, everything that's connecting to it. You'll see that we've had sort of, I mean, my math's not brilliant, but 400, 500 attacks in the last 15 minutes. And scrolling down, whilst I appreciate a lot of this on here possibly won't make too much sense to someone that's non-technical, we can just see which of our systems are being targeted, which ports are being targeted. So at the moment, it looks like we have DNS and file sharing. But then when we scroll down, we can also see in the last 15 minutes, some of our platforms have been targeted with the username admin, UUCP, SA. And then if we take this just a tiny bit, let's do the last hour. Now these figures should update. So in the last hour, you're probably talking close on 2,000 or so attacks. And then you can see the common usernames. So anyone that is within IT would know that best practice is to change default usernames and passwords. And this is the exact reason why. Ultimately, if a default username is root and the passwords, I don't know, let's choose one, root, then that remote attacker will be able to access that system. I also appreciate that's a very, very basic example. All I'm trying to highlight here is that there are systems on the internet that are targeting every organization all the time. Right, so ransomware, as I mentioned, is the biggest risk at the moment. And the main reason for that is because of how easy it is. Now, I don't want to focus too much on just talking to you about ransomware and attacks in general. I want to get on to how you guys can protect yourselves against it. But I just wanted to pull out here a few of the biggest ransomware gangs. Now, a lot of ransomware gangs will ultimately be selling their service as a service. So as you get like software as a service, ransomware gangs sell ransomware as a service. So this is essentially where a ransomware gang is setting up a platform, almost like a shopping cart, if you like, to provide other attackers access to that piece of ransomware and the platform. And ultimately, they're called affiliates. And the main ransomware gang that's created the platform will be getting a cut from that. So if, say, I went on there and I paid for access to this platform, I deployed the ransomware to one of my targets, and that target paid, I would get a chunk, and then the ransomware gang would also get a chunk. It's also important to note that ransomware is actually no longer the end goal of a cyber attack, and it's fair to say, although that is disputed within the industry. But one of the biggest things is double extortion and triple extortion, which has increased as a result of people's backups, for the most part, being significantly better than they were, say, 12 months ago. So ransomware, the only way of recovering from a ransomware attack is by restoring from a backup. So all the systems are encrypted, and then you have to wipe all those systems and restore from a backup. If you don't have backups, then it becomes a more difficult conversation about whether or not you should pay. Because if you've got the dilemma of, well, I'm going to lose my business if I don't get all this data back, then it is possible that that might need to be a consideration. However, most people within the industry and law enforcement would tell you never to pay a ransomware attack. Lockbit is probably one of the biggest ones. Now, I did a seminar possibly a year ago now, and somebody asked me, well, why don't the law enforcement just go and take them down? Well, Lockbit actually earlier on this year was taken down by a joint effort between the US and the UK law enforcement. And the platform was offline for maybe 2 or 3 days, and they just spun it all back up again, brand new infrastructure, a brand new environment, and now they're back to attacking people once again. This is a snippet from, we can't possibly do any type of cybersecurity session without giving you some sorts of stats. It's just illegal. I don't necessarily want you to focus too much on the numbers on the left-hand side, because this is just a snippet from one threat intelligence and security company, the NCC Group. If you want to read the full report, the link is at the bottom of the presentation. But essentially, what I want to focus on here is the increase between 2022 and 2023. And that's an increase of around 80% with my bad maths. So this is a scenario, or rather some news that's of a law firm that's been breached. Now, this is quite an old one now. It's probably a couple of years old. However, I thought it was really, really good to go over this as a sample for you, so that ultimately everybody can learn from this company's mistakes. But essentially, it's relatively small or fairly average SME with 100 staff and several offices all over the UK. And they had a ransomware attack in August of 2022, whereby the 60,000 clients' data was extracted, some of which, 64 court bundles that were listed on the dark web. Some of those were actually containing personal and data from personal and special categories. Now, they opted not to pay for the ransom. However, it is rumored to be in excess of £1 million for that. Now, they did engage with external security consultants, and they were initially fined 3.25% of their turnover for June of 2022. However, because of all of the way in which they approached the breach, the way in which they reported it, all of the improvement works that they did, that was actually reviewed by the ICO, Information Commissioner's Office, and that fine was reduced to £98,000. Now, the attack itself, it primarily affected the archive server and the backups as well. So they hadn't got any backups for this. Now, thankfully, the actual live data server wasn't impacted, which is where the vast majority of the personal data was stored. But some of the data that was taken did include things like medical files, witness statements, name and addresses of witnesses and victims, and various crimes, or alleged crimes rather, of individuals, including children. Now, this isn't sort of like a really, really low level summary of this attack. It's very high level, so there are bits missing. However, it's quite well publicized on the internet, published. It's on the ICO website if you want to go and read it in a bit more detail. Now, when they had incident response, they couldn't 100% determine how the attackers managed to get in, but evidence suggests that it was from a known vulnerability in the system, which was likely Citrix, which they were using. Now, that patch was released in 2020, and it wasn't actually applied until some months later. Now, I just want to pause there for a second. I'd just like you all to have a think about this if it was you in this situation, your company. So you get into work one day, whether or not you're a member of staff or you're on the leadership team. You get into work, all the data is encrypted, you're unable to work, you're unable to email, you're unable to make telephone calls. What would you actually do, in this situation? Would you trust your IT partner or internal IT team, who may not necessarily have the experience or the knowledge to deal with a cyber breach? There's a specific skill set involved with investigating breaches, and it's highly likely that a lot of IT people may not have experience or been through it before. So if you chose to go down the route of getting an external third party involved to help you with the security, then you've got the considerations of potentially not having an incident response contract in place. There can be delays in trying to get such a contract in place. Often, if there's no incident response plan, everyone's running around like a headless chicken. No one's really in charge. No one really knows what to do next. And then you've also got the concern of whether or not you will get your data back. And then, there's always the conversation around whether or not to pay. But if you put that aside for 1 second, even if you did pay, what about the exfiltrated data? How can you be certain that the exfiltrated data is going to be deleted? At the end of the day, a gang has broken into your systems and stolen your data. Are you really going to trust them? So the root cause of this, as I mentioned, was highly likely down to missing patches. And by patches, all I mean is an update to a piece of software. You've almost certainly all seen this on your own computers. It could be something as basic as an update for Chrome or Firefox, or potentially Windows updates. So that's ultimately what happened here, or is suspected to have happened. So that patch was actually released in January of 2020, but wasn't installed until June 2020. And it's assumed that the attackers gained access prior to that, potentially months before, months access, doing reconnaissance and things like that. Now, the NCSC released a notice. I think that was January 2020. The NCSC released a notice to patch, and unusually, they also provided a link to a specific tool to check as to whether or not you were vulnerable. Now, the NCSC and Cyber Essentials, they always advise that you need to patch anything high and critical within 14 days. So that's obviously a significant less period of time to what happened in this event. I think what makes it more concerning is this patch was actually free. So whilst there might be costs involved from your IT partner or your MSP to apply that patch. The actual patch itself was completely free. So the other point to note is that this particular organization went through Cyber Essentials in 2019, so up to a year before the attack actually happened. They failed to meet the criteria because of patching issues, and they clearly didn't remediate it. So that would have been part of the ICO's decision-making process, I'd imagine, when they come up with the fine. So this is something we see all too often. Companies will have a policy to comply with a particular type of standard or regulation, or it could be, a supplier that you're working with or a partner that says you must have XYZ policy in place. What's interesting about this organization is they did have a policy. And as you can see on the screen there, it mentions that all software, operating system, and firmware shall be updated on a regular basis to reduce the risk presented by security vulnerabilities. So it's clear that this particular company had a policy, but wasn't necessarily following their own policy. Now, the commissioner found that a number of areas had inadequate protection over the period. So ultimately, they would have taken, well, it's my opinion, they would have taken the period of time that this attack has happened, and they've analysed it and said that it's unlikely that they had adequate protection during that time. The attackers would have got in through Citrix, which is a remote access software for people accessing from home, or for whatever reason, the organisations decided that they're going to use Citrix. And that was online on the internet, visible to anybody that had an internet connection that had a lack of MFA. So it means that if a user was to get phished, for instance, that would have been another method in. They also found out that the patch management wasn't okay. They weren't running any type of data encryption. So the data on the servers wasn't encrypted. And they were also running some end-of-life operating systems as well. Now, I'm no legal expert, but from a quick Google, I think it's 7 years in legal for you to store the data, and they were storing data for significantly longer than that. So, although they hadn't necessarily taken it serious up to the point of the breach, they actually handled it quite well, in a sense that they'd reported it to all of these various places. They got external help. Now, this is quite rare, actually. I see all the time where I'm involved in incident response, and quite a few of them go and report it to the ICO. That could be for various reasons. If we're dealing with a breach where it's just a single user mailbox that's been breached, a lot of organizations deem this to not be a breach, when in fact it is. So it's really, really important if you have any type of cyber incident where you have confirmed that data has been taken or potentially taken. Now, I strongly recommend that you go through the ICO process for reporting that. The SRA, although unless you're in legal, then this won't apply to you. They've also got certain minimum requirements for all of these things as well. I worked on a ransomware incident probably 3 years ago now, that was reported to Action Fraud. Now, Action Fraud decided that they were going to investigate that issue, and that particular gang actually got caught, and they're currently in jail for it. So these are the improvements that these guys made. Now, these ultimately are the reason why their fine got reduced from a percentage of their turnover to just under 100,000. It was 98,000 or something like that. So they signed up for a special cyber griffin program from the City of London Police. They upgraded and isolated all of their legacy environment, enabled encryption, implemented multi-factor on all of their remotely accessible systems. They also purchased some additional software. That's likely going to be something like an endpoint detection and response platform. They also patched a significant amount of infrastructure, and they then went back through Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. One of the biggest issues actually from the report is that they were significantly under-resourced from a cybersecurity perspective internally. So they recruited additional members of staff to help with that. And from reading it, I would assume that they've also taken up an external contract with a security company to help. And last two, they have an automatic data retention policy. So it means that they're limiting the amount of data that they're keeping on their systems, which reduces the impact in the event of an actual breach. And given that they've gone through all of this now, I can guarantee that their incident response procedure is probably rock solid. That's another issue that we see quite common, is a company will have an incident response process, possibly to tick a box somewhere, but has never actually tested it. So that's key. So make sure that you've got an incident response process in place. You know the key people that need to be involved in that incident, and making sure that you keep an offline copy as well. Don't just keep it digitally. So, contact numbers for the key people involved, who's going to lead the whole thing, because sometimes you can get too many people involved, and you end up all running around, even if you do have a plan. These are the typical stages of a ransomware attack. Majority of them follow this, so they sort of get an understanding of your environment from an external perspective. They'll get an initial foothold into your network. That could be with the example I've just given, with a vulnerability. It could also be through phishing or any type of initial access, basically, to get access to an individual's machine. And then their goal would be to escalate that access from a standard user up to a domain admin user, which is the highest level of access feasible within a system. And that's when they would execute their files, exfiltrate the data first, and then deploy the ransomware. So it's just very high level. I often get asked, a lot of clients are interested in what the dark web is and what an actual ransomware attack looks like. Now, as you'll see the screenshot on the left, this is a typical log page that you would see on an endpoint that's encrypted. So it kind of just explains, it's quite scary, just explains, important files stolen, they're encrypted. We'll also provide information, typically within a text file, that outlines how you can get your data back. They will also provide you evidence that they do have the data. So they'll provide you access. It's actually on the next slide, I'll just show you. So these are the instructions. It shows you where what the URL is to access that particular breach. And then they will give you access to see some of the files that they've taken, just to prove that they do actually have your data and the ability to decrypt them. This was for the Royal Mail Group. Royal Mail Group got hacked several months ago, which was their overseas operation. And this is the exact screenshot of the Lockbit website showing the Royal Mail Group. Now, anybody that has access to the particular application, which I won't go into too much detail on, it's a specific application to gain access to the dark web. They would be able to click on that and they will be able to see all the files within that particular breach. This is just meant to highlight the lengths that the attackers are willing to go. So this is the chat negotiation between the Lockbit ransomware gang and Royal Mail Group. Although I suspect this is probably their cyber insurance negotiators more so than somebody internal. But yeah, they'll offer discounts. If it's a ransomware as a service where they're running an affiliate program, they will often have a code of ethics, which I always find really amusing. That a criminal gang has a code of ethics, and that could cover things like not attacking hospitals or not attacking a particular industry. Now, if an affiliate is found to be attacking such organization, the ransomware gang will normally provide the decryption key for free, and then they will strike that affiliate off the list so they're not able to conduct business with them. Yeah, that thought always does amuse me. So, what you can do about it. So, there isn't really one size fits all here. The main thing is assessing your environment to some sort of level. If you're a small organization, then Cyber Essentials would probably be a good place to start. If you're slightly larger, or you have a more complex environment where potentially, you've got a business critical system that you can't update for whatever reason, then you might be better off taking more of a risk-based approach, which is always my preferred method, and doing something like 10 steps to cyber. The key thing to mention here is that whilst 10 steps to cyber does cover incident response in quite some detail, Cyber Essentials doesn't. So you could be aligned to Cyber Essentials certified. However, you may still not have an incident response plan. So my key takeaway for everybody is understand what's going to happen in an attack, speak to your suppliers, speak to your partners if you've got an MSP, understand what responsibilities each individual stakeholder has within that, and make sure the plan is tested. If you've got a plan that's never been tested, you won't necessarily know what's going to go wrong within the actual event. Now, you could also conduct some sort of tabletop exercise, which would be ideal. I mean, if it's a smaller company, then this will be quite quick. If it's a larger organization, then ultimately the plan testing or the tabletop exercise, could take a bit longer. So there are some free advice and resources available from the NCSC and also TaylorMade on the TaylorMade blog. The NCSC offer a board toolkit. Whilst that sounds like it's only targeted towards large organizations, and that's actually not quite true. It just gives help and advice on how to create incident response and also the incident response planning, and then the cyber exercise creation helped create a tabletop exercise. Password advice, that's basically advice around how to create passwords that you are complex enough and long enough to be easily memorable, but not easily crackable. And the easiest way of doing this is by implementing a password manager. So if you've got a password manager, you can ultimately have a passphrase. So the NCSC recommend think random 3 words, and then you need to remember 2 passwords essentially, one for the password manager and one to log into your machine. All of the other passwords for every other system that you use can be put into the password manager, and you don't even need to know what they are. And that would reduce a significant number of breaches as a result of password reuse. Now, on the NCSC website, they've got different guides for different stakeholders. So they've got advice on personal passwords. They've got advice on for MSPs. They've got advice for individual businesses. So you just need to have a look to find the appropriate ones. And then we're also going to be, over the next X months, I don't want to commit to it, be increasing the quantity of advice that we've got on our blog. There's already a few bits on there now. We're also posting on LinkedIn. And then, we're going to be doing more educational events. And of course, you have me and my team that can help as well. Right, so that brings us to the end. So if there's any questions you'd like to pop into the chat, I will attempt to stop sharing my screen and then open the chat window. If you don't want to pop any messages in the chat, then you're more than welcome to send through your messages via your account manager through email. and we're happy to have a one-on-one chat or respond to your email. No, okay. Well, that's great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. As I say, if you want to speak to us afterwards, then that would be great.